Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to my podcast, Spiritual Talk with Christy Godwin and Friends. I'm your resident psychic medium, Christy Godwin, and I am here with my beautiful friend and colleague, Iris Libby. Thank you for being here, Iris.
Thank you for having me, Christy.
Now, Iris is an incredible astrologer and also I was about to say a bad word. I won't. A kick rear end psychic medium also. Sometimes I do not know what I can say on these podcasts, so I try to keep it G-rated. So today, Iris and I are actually here to talk about a very serious topic that has come to light in both of our practices and in our joint practices that we have helping people release trauma. And the subject matter is about people who have had abuse happen to them when they were kids and they weren't believed. And I have had some of that happening recently, actually, with as an adult who has a child and her feels like her child is not being believed. Now, Iris, why do you think children's voices are often dismissed, and why do you think they're not believed?
Well, I think there are many reasons. I think there's some that are societal, like children make things up, right? I also think that abuse is really misunderstood. So, it's not only physical, it could be verbal. For instance, a father could call a woman a stupid witch with a
Right,
B, a
right.
stupid witch, right? And that is a type of abuse. And I don't, or any names you call each other, a mother calling a father a bastard, those are forms of abuse that they're micro abuses, but they can really affect a child. I also think that caregivers are idealized in a way because we look at, we revere mothers, we revere fathers, and we don't want to think anything is wrong. I also think that there's a adult bias and a lot of power dynamics going on. For instance, adults know best, right? They're the parent, they know best. And I think there's a lot of dismissal of the way, like, of interpretation, like, oh, they didn't mean it that way, right? Like, grandpa put his hand up my skirt. No, he didn't mean it that way. He was just fixing your underwear. When a child knows when they feel uncomfortable, and I also think one of the biggest things is fear of consequences. Because if you tell a parent, and so I've had abuse in my life, and if you tell a parent this happens, what is going to happen to the family? Like, is the
Right.
family going to break up? Are you going to be starving on the street? Is your mother or your father going to be angry at you? And a child's whole world is their parents.
I agree with Iris unloaded a whole lot right there. Let's see if we can break it down. One of the things I was when you're talking about parents, I so agree with you. And also, people don't want to get involved. I know growing up, there was someone in my life who was less than stellar, let's just say, and people were afraid of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I would try to say something, but then you have to go home with that person, and people don't want to get involved. Like they don't want to. I think, and I do get this, someone's worst fear is to be falsely accused of something.
Yeah.
So if you are very, if you instantly, when before you accuse someone, you put yourself in that situation, like, is this child just trying to get back at their parents? Are they trying to, manipulate the situation to make it look worse for them? But something I want to, and I'm sure we'll cover this further in this, but this is something that I want to have everyone listening to this remember. And I'm sure Iris and I will talk about it later on, is a child has to have a frame of reference. And so many times I have seen people think kids are making it up. If it is something sexual or inappropriate, they have to have a frame of reference. So if your child is saying someone is touching them inappropriately, except they're not using the word inappropriately, they're being very descriptive. We cannot do that here on this podcast. they have to have a frame of reference. So did it actually happen? Were they watching something they shouldn't have been watching? Because even exposing children to that kind of films is also abuse. So I want everyone to remember a child does, they do fabricate, but there has to be a frame of reference.
And that brings up another thing. Those are great points, and that is grooming and threats. You
Yes.
know,
Thank you,
many
Irish. Yes.
children are they're groomed to behave a certain way, or they might not get dinner. They might not get, like, in other words, you like a lot of people do that. I'm not talking about parents, I'm talking about coaches, I'm talking about teachers, I'm talking about people out there are grooming your children. They know, these predators know what they're looking for, and they know the type of child that they go after. And, and also threatening them. If you tell anyone, our whole family's going to break up.
I've heard that. I've heard that so many times. You won't see daddy anymore. Daddy will have to go to jail and it'll be all your fault. Or, mommy and daddy will split up and you won't see mommy anymore. Just whichever, however. And predators are very smart. I want people to remember that. They are smart and everyone thinks it's going to be, they're going to look at that person and they're going to instantly have predator or unsafe written across their forehead. They don't. They are your neighbor. They are your upstanding citizen. The ones that I have dealt with in my practice, and Iris and I have dealt with some together in our joint practice that we have, Awakening Your Path, is the people that actually were the predator were the ones that you never would have thought. They were in positions of power. They were educated. They, everyone thinks it's going to be, oh, the person that is mentally well, clearly they're mentally unstable, but you can't see it. And we give power to these people, and it's them misusing power. So
Mm.
believe your children. Now, Iris, have you noticed a difference in cultural and family dynamics that contribute to the dismissal or the disbelief of children's reports of abuse?
Yes. So for instance, I have abuse in my background by two people in my life. And culturally, like, I was told your father would never do that. And so I think that there's this it's shame, it's like isolation due to a
Mhm.
stigma that, like, if my family came out about that, and it was also a male cousin, that it would have blown up the whole family culture, the whole family unit. And I really feel that that is a big problem. And also, I'm going to say something that most of our justice system is run by men. And I'm not saying that men are all the perpetrators, but they do tend to protect each other. And it's like, you want to protect the family, you want to protect the religion, you want to protect the unit. Look at how hard it was in the Catholic Church for, it to be exposed, because it kept getting swept under the rug by priests, by, because you want to protect your culture, you want to, your upstanding citizens. So I think, it's very, very difficult. And there's also fear of retaliation and
Yes.
consequences, and, and I think that makes it makes it very difficult for children, not being believed and knowing that their whole life is going to change. And they don't know if it's going to change for the better. They're assuming, because they're being told, it's going to change for the worse, because they're bringing down the family.
Exactly.
A lot of blame.
Yes. And, I have seen that a lot. And when you look at family dynamics, and this is just one, Iris and I are kind of talking about just there can be so many reasons why culturally it is swept under the rug or in a family. I've known a lot of times for financial reasons, it is swept under the rug. Maybe And in the instances that I've dealt with, the mom was not financially stable enough on her own. So she ignored it because it would have affected her standard of living. And I know a lot of people listening to that will be scratching their heads and not understand it, but I promise you, it is happening. If you look at the stats on this kind of abuse, they're staggering. They are staggering. One in three um, females by the time they're 18 will have had some kind of abuse happen to them, sexual abuse happen to them, either by family member, partner. It will have happened in some way. And of course, it's even worse stigma when it comes to talking about male children.
Yeah. And I also want to say you may have a dependency on your abuser. So that fear of consequence and being blamed is so powerful and pervasive for a young child to handle. It can be overwhelming. Plus, you may not be believed.
Absolutely. You know, we have, and this is such a tough situation. I do understand that when you go to accuse someone, the powers that be want to make sure they're 1,000% accurate as they should. I'm going to repeat what I have repeated because I have been surprised that some of the powers that be did not understand children need a frame of reference. They do not make these sexual things up out of their head. They have to have been exposed to them somehow. They need a frame of reference. My undergrad is in child development. I taught child development at the collegiate level for 20 years. I have a full stack of child psychology books over here if anyone would like to reference them. It has been proven over and over, children need a frame of reference. Also, something I've noticed that a little bit off subject, but here in our area, there is a group that is really known for working for children. They do a wonderful job. But sometimes I've noticed that some of even, it's according to who is doing the interviewing, because you can't just throw a 2, 3, 4-year-old in a room with a stranger and start asking them questions and expect them to talk about this. There has to be some comfort there. So that's who the kids are going to hear it from first. I mean, that's who's going to hear it from the children first. Their caregivers, the people they feel comfortable with, their teachers, their daycare providers, whoever they feel comfortable with are the ones that are going to hear about this first. And another side note, if you do hear about it, report it. If you don't feel comfortable addressing it, don't. I would suggest you don't. I would suggest um, you reporting it. Now, Iris, can you share, or do you know some examples of how system and processes unintentionally discourage children from coming forward?
Well, I think there's a lot of like I think in certain ways, a lot of it is there's a shame and self blame
Yeah.
involved with
Yeah.
it. And then there's a distrust of others. If I tell them, what are they going to do with this information? I also feel that, a lot of kids that are abused have a lot of anger and resentment.
Mhm.
So
Mm.
the way it comes out may come out the wrong way because they don't really know how to express the anxiety that they're feeling from, this abuse. Like kids don't know really what to do with it.
Yes, thank you, Iris. Thank you for bringing that up. Um, again, teaching child development at a collegiate level. I taught a lot of preschool teachers and people that were going in to teach kindergarten and first grade. And those children who come in there, all kids are lovable. So I want people to put this in context that it's the ones that are the hardest to love are the ones who need the love the most. Because when children are loved at home, they come to school to learn. When they're not loved at home, they come to school to be loved. But how children ask for love is the way Iris was talking about it. If they're exposed to violence or they're used to being pushed aside and not listened to, they're going to act out and ask for love in a way that is inappropriate. Hitting other kids, throwing things, being disobedient, not listening, not getting their work done. Those are all ways that kids are crying out. And another thing I want to talk to people about is another really pay attention to children who have digressed in their potty training. That
Mm.
is a huge one. Pay attention to kids and how they play with toys. How do they interact with their toys? Do they love their toys? Do they act inappropriately with their toys? Those are some things you really want to pay attention to. Now we're going to, oh, I'm sorry, we're going to say
I
something
was
else.
going to say that brings up a good point. Like if you have a child that's a bedwetter, bedwetters are often, I mean, Louise Hay talks about it with fear of father, but there's also something going on with the father. I was a bedwetter and I was being abused by my father. So the thing is that if my parents would have looked at that, and it didn't happen immediately, it started at the age of 2 and it stopped at 5 when I stopped being abused. So it's an interesting look at children's behavior.
And especially if they digress, especially if they didn't wet the bed and then they start. That is a huge indicator. Of course, yes, have the kidney and bladder infections and all of that checked, but that is a huge one. So if you have that on top of on top of a couple of other indicators on how children play with toys, have they started acting out? Now, we want to talk about a little bit, Iris, how can how in your practice have you seen this affecting people as they grow, like when they were not listened to as children? I know poor Iris. I want to apologize to Iris right now because I gave her a list of questions and I'm not staying to it. But she's doing a fabulous job going with the flow. I appreciate her today.
So what was your question again? I got
Right, because it's not on the list. She's probably thinking, Christy, where'd that come from? Where'd you pull that question from?
no, it's
But
okay.
we were talking about how, you can see some of this in children, how their behaviors digress. So when they're not listened to and their behaviors digress, it stores in their body. How do you see that? How do
Okay.
they react to it as an
They
adult? How do you
start
see that?
acting out. They start acting out. So it could be tantrums, it could be anger, it could be bedwetting, it could be starting fights, it could be withdrawing, it could be seeking more attention, like being more flamboyant. It could be overeating, undereating. It
Yes,
could be any anything physical or emotional could start coming out. Your child could totally withdraw or totally, like I had this experience with a child where she was doing, it was clear she was abused, but she was doing handstands with no underwear on. I mean, at 4 years old, a child at 4 years old knows not to do handstands without underwear on, you
right.
know. So clearly something was going on.
Absolutely. And I want people to, so for if you're around children at all, which most of us are in some capacity, whether you're an actual caregiver or you're an aunt that hangs out with children. If you are someone who a child trusts, just know that you might be their first line of defense. Please be prepared. If you only see your niece or nephew once every couple of months and you notice a marked difference in their behavior, ask them how they've been doing. Be gentle. You don't leave them. Just ask them, hey, how are you feeling? What have you been playing? Who have you been playing with? Has your friend group changed? Just ask them very normal questions. Also, I've noticed because I worked a lot with teenagers also, this behavior can manifest in teenage years if they were not listened to as a child. So as a child, if they were not listened to, they might have been acting out. They got in a lot of trouble. They got their behavior under control, right? Because they were very much under the influence of the bigger, stronger adults around them. As children start growing and hit teenage years, they get some autonomy where they can now be more reactive. They have more control over their bodies and the places they go, and they can also start acting out as a teenager for something that occurred when they were a child.
With drugs and sex
Yes,
and,
all kinds of things.
and wild behavior that is out of character for them.
Yes, wild behavior. self-harm, under eating, like Ira said, overeating.
Or cutting themselves
Yes,
or
the
doing
self-harm.
things to harm themselves,
Yes,
pulling out their hair, picking at their skin, all of those things.
yes, all kinds of self-harm, and especially being promiscuous and acting out in a way that is unsafe for them. Now, Iris, why do you think it's often easier for communities to protect the abuser than it is the to believe and support the child?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons why. I think there's fear of disruption, disrupting your life, disrupting your flow. I mean, this sounds ridiculous, but
It's
and then
true, though.
but there is that fear. Oh my God, we just got everything into, like we just got into a rhythm and now you're going to throw this bomb in, or this child's going to. And there's also the power and the influence of the abuser. If the abuser is, whether male or female, the sole bread earner, then, it can be scary. There's also the stigma and the shame of having that in your family. There's a lot of shame attached to that because people don't talk about it. Also, I think victim blaming is a big thing because they always, I mean, in a lot of abuse cases, and I don't know if you all remember, but it's always the woman was dressed a certain way, or they behaved a certain way, or they looked a certain way. And I also think that there's a lot of denial that happens. Our system fails us because the process is too lengthy. It's too difficult for children to go through. And you always know when a child is telling the truth if their story is consistent with what they're saying. And I think that there's a loyalty, which we've talked about, to the family, which is hard. And also, I think that it's just, there's a misunderstanding of childhood trauma on a
Yeah,
basic
yeah.
level on how this will traumatize your child.
I want people to also, and that I've noticed this a lot in my practice and working with clients, is that for the most part, most people cannot fathom an uncle, father, or someone doing that, right? And so let's just say you're going to report this crime. The first instinct for the person receiving the report is going to be disgust because they couldn't imagine themselves ever doing that. So they're like, well, this child has to be lying because who in their right mind would do that? So there is that component where you just cannot believe someone. Well, that person is and I'm not saying this is any of the people around me. I am just using some examples. That person is a judge or a pastor or a pilot or a, you know,
Police officer.
police officer, whoever it is. So they have a position of status. There is no way they would do that. Well, yeah, they would. And I'm not you saying all of those people are terrible. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying believe the children. When the children point their finger at someone and say something that is out of context that they should have no context for, please listen to them. I think that that is one of the hardest things. And also, when children tell a story, I don't want people to think, and it's the same thing when an adult tells a story. Any story based in trauma is never going to go from point A, B, C, D in a linear fashion because of the way our brain stores trauma. We have
Mm.
a part of our brain that we store information in, you're those algebraic equations and all that fun stuff we learn. And so you go to that file and you pull it out, da 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 da, da a linear fashion. Trauma is stored in our fight or flight part of our brain because that part of our brain is meant to keep us safe. So the next time you are around someone that smells like your abuser did, or walks like your abuser did, or talked like your abuser did, your part of your brain that keeps you safe needs to say, get out of there quick. So they store the trauma in your fight or flight spot in your brain. That When you have information stored in that area, it does not get pulled out in a linear fashion from A to B to C. It's very jumbled. So kids,
especially for children.
as I'm gonna say, especially with children, because what they do is they try to make sense out of something that is nonsensical. So they might take something that they have something that happened to them that they shouldn't have a reference for, and put it into something they do have a reference for. Let's just say they are talking about people touching them inappropriate, whatever, and then all of a sudden they start talking about Bluey, like, the little show. It's not because they're lying. It's because they were trying to make sense of this horrific event. So they were pulling things that they have in their head stored and trying to mesh them together to make this horrific event make sense. So sometimes when kids talk about it, it's a little bit nonsensical because they're not pulling it in an ABC fashion, and they're putting things in there that don't match. They're talking about their favorite cartoon character along with this person who touched them inappropriately. It's just the way their information is stored. Research it, ask questions. Kids have to have a point of reference. Now, Iris, how do you think parents and guardians can create an environment where children feel safe and comfortable talking about these things?
Well, I think there's a lot of things they can do. It's interesting. I saw something on, I think it was TikTok yesterday, and it was this young boy. He was probably about, I don't know, 8 years old. And he was walking home from school. And this woman started talking to him, this very friendly woman saying, "Oh, I know your mother. If you come with me, I'll take you to her. I'm going to get you some candy. I'm going to get you some this." And this boy was very well trained because he was like staying away from the woman, and he could tell that she might grab him. So he went into a store because he was walking home from school or from wherever. And he went into a store and went to the owner of the store and asked her to pretend like she was his mother because he thought that woman was dangerous. So the woman came out and said, "I'm his mother," and the other woman ran away. So I think that was a good example of a child being well trained. I mean, this isn't abuse, but he could have been abused
It could
in
have
that,
been.
but I think we have to start with communication without judgment, because
Ah,
in the
yes,
story,
yes.
that woman did not doubt for a minute what was happening to that kid and went out to pretend like she was his mother. Right. So I think that, open communication without judgment is really important. I also think validating kids' emotions, like, "Oh, they touched you in the wrong place. How did that feel?" Right? Like, how did it feel when that man put his hand up your skirt? Like, you have to validate what's going on and then teach your child how to protect themselves. I also think that if, as parents and caretakers, we model vulnerability and honesty, like teaching kids that vulnerability to a trusted person is a plus, that's something we need to do. Also, and I don't know if a lot of parents do this, but I think fostering like a no secrets policy where this family does not keep secrets. Now, that's hard because I want to say, as a child, I knew my parents were keeping secrets, right? But they didn't have a no secrets policy. The other thing is, I think parents and caregivers have to be consistently present. Like, you need to be around your children to look at, is their behavior changing? Are they becoming withdrawn? Like, what is going on? Because if you're not present, you don't know. Also, I mean, I know this is hard for a lot of parents, but educate your kids on body autonomy and also boundaries. Like, nobody is allowed to touch you there except yourself, right?
Right.
Like nobody is allowed to do that, or a doctor in a doctor's office when you're with your mother or your father, like those are the only times. And I think a lot of kids don't do that. And then, I think creating a safe emotional space. And one thing that happened to me was avoiding overreacting. You know, my mother overreacted, and got really upset. Like, that never happened, like, and you're told that you're a liar, right?
Right.
Also, I think that there are subtle signs that we were talking about that you need to assure. And then also reminding your kids. Like, I think that kid who went into the store to ask that shopkeeper to pretend like she was his mother was well trained
Yes.
by parents to know that this isn't right. I'm never going to send someone to pick you up. That's not me. But he
Right.
knew, he was young.
Right. We have, and I have three daughters, and we always had a safe word. If I was going to send someone after them, even if it was a friend of mine, even if it was someone they knew well, they were instructed not to go with them, because that is also how people groom the children, by being your friend. And then they become a trusted member of the family. So my kids were not allowed to go with anyone, even if they were knew the person, unless they had the safe word. And being honest with your children, and I want, and sometimes I laugh, and some of my girlfriends have laughed about this. Like, I was so open with my kids, sometimes they would tell me things and I'd be like, I don't want to hear this. It wasn't anything like abuse. It was just things going on in their life. It's like, this is TMI, Lord have mercy. But I was very thankful that they were open enough, because I try not to ever, I try not to overreact. I want everyone to remember that our children are trying to navigate this world as we are. And as adults, we make mistakes, so they are too. So have an open policy where they can come to you with the mistakes they made without you overreacting, because then when they need a safe place to fall, that's going to create it. When they can feel comfortable coming to you, admitting their mistakes, and you're going to help them through it. I'm not talking about saving them every time, but I'm talking about helping them create a plan that they can implement to correct mistakes. That gives them a safe place to fall.
And
Um,
that teaches them such good problem solving
yes.
skills, right? That
Yes.
they need in life.
Yeah, one of my kids had a huge setback. I don't know, it was a few months ago. Came to me hysterical, and they were like, "What am I going to do?" I was like, "You're going to pivot, because that's what we do. We pivot." And so me remaining calm helped her remain calm, and she's an adult now. Also something, and I know this is going to be a sore spot for a lot of people, but I please listen to this. If you're with your child, put your phone down, be present.
Mm.
I know that sometimes you can pick it up and answer a text or make a phone call. I know, sometimes it might look like I'm playing, but I have my grocery list on the phone. So I understand that people might, oh, let me add that to my, cart, so I can, when I have my groceries delivered, it's right there. And so you would pick up your phone and do things, little things like that. But I'm talking about this doomsday scrolling as you are with your children. I was in just a sweet little place we have here where kids can go and play. They play with trains. I was there with my grandson, and I was helping him build something. They had these train tracks out, and I was helping him build. The whole time I was there building, there was this little boy who was building right beside us, and he kept looking up at his mom, hoping his mom would look at him. And she was on her phone. He must have had to, every time he wanted her attention, he must have had to say her name 16 times before she would even look at him. She would look, acknowledge, and go back to her phone. Put your
Mm.
phone down. Be present for your child. Listen to what they are not saying, because body language is about 85% of communication.
Mm.
Listen and observe your child's body language.
That's a very good point, Christy, because when someone backs away from someone or doesn't want to come so close to someone and you push that child near that person, there's a reason why they're feeling that way. Children really are more intuitive than we are on many levels, and they go with their intuition. So there's something there if they're acting afraid.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up, Iris. A lot of times, I've seen people and parents don't think about it in this way, but they want their children, oh, go hug Uncle whoever, Uncle Joe. If there's Uncle Joe out there listening to this, I'm very sorry. I'm not pointing my finger at you. I'm just using it. They'll say, go hug Uncle Joe. And the child, I don't want to. I don't want to. No, go do it. Let your child have that body on autonomy. If they don't want to hug Uncle Joe, then they should be able to say no. Give them control of their body. Help them to learn to say the word no. Now, Iris, what role does education play in teaching our children, you think, how to articulate their concerns or recognize when they're being mistreated? Do you think education, now we talked about some parental education. Do you think our school systems should? I know this is a touchy subject. We're only going to give about 30 seconds for people listening because it is touchy. But what do you think? Do you think the school system should play a role?
I do think the school system should, and I think they should do this by normalizing open communication. And I also think by providing the language to express concerns. Like, even if there's a code word of somebody made me feel uncomfortable. And, I just feel like we don't have the language. And then I also think, as far as education, educating teachers to recognize the signs of mistreatment. And also, I don't think children are really empowered to advocate for themselves, and to say, if, like you said, if you don't want to go near someone, if, as a child, you shouldn't have to. And that's a kind of empowerment. And then also the families and communities have to be involved. But I
Yeah,
think that there's such a stigma about child abuse. Nobody wants to admit it's going on. Nobody wants to
right.
admit it. So they would have to create a safe space for expression to do this. And I think it's a challenge for the schools and the school system, because nobody wants to admit that it's going on.
Now we're going to close up with this last question. And now that we've talked about how to recognize it, believe the children, some things you can look for survivors of child abuse who were not believed, Iris, what do you are some steps that they can do to heal and regain trust? I know that this is you know what? How about we just touch on it very lightly and then we'll do a whole nother podcast on that because that is one in itself. But let's just talk through a couple of things about how adults can start to heal. Be on the lookout. There will be another part and that we'll talk about how can adults heal because that is a whole series on its own.
Well, being someone who's healed from it, I can say that professional support helped me to understand it and then to come to terms with it. And today I have to say that I have no anger about it, which is
Right.
pretty amazing that I have come to that full circle. So I think that that's number one. And I think the other thing is to acknowledge and validate your pain, even if your family won't. My family still won't. So
Right.
even if they won't, you have to acknowledge and validate your own pain for you. And also, I built a very supportive community of friends who were there to help me through the whole thing. And I practiced a lot of self-compassion for myself.
Yes.
Um, and I refrained from blaming myself, like that it was anyway my my fault.
Mhm.
And then there's one more thing, is that I had to address my feelings of betrayal,
Yes.
which was
Yeah.
huge. So, but I have no anger in me
I
anymore
will
about.
say, for those of you listening to this, Iris and I have a business together. Awakening Your Path, which we have written a book about. It should be out soon. And her addressing her feelings of betrayal were a big part of kicking that system off. Something that happened to me kind of was the beginning of kicking it off. And then we used it with Iris in her feelings of betrayal to really work that through. So I want everyone to be listening. We will put out a whole nother podcast on how some specific steps, but Iris came up with some great ones that you can implement now is get professional help, have compassion for yourself. One day when you think you're getting over this and not moving past it because you never forget, she said, I want you to listen to what Iris said. She said she has no anger. She didn't condone it. She did not condone it. She said, I have no anger, which means she's processed it to the point where she's acknowledged that it happened, but she's not going to let it run her life. And that's what we need to get to. There is a difference between seeking justice for ourselves and having forgiveness for a person and revenge. Those are two different things. Revenge just perpetuates those negative feelings within yourself, letting go of that anger. Feeling your feelings, having compassion for yourself is a completely different route.
And I want to say one more thing about having no anger. It's a state of neutrality for me. It's
Mm-hmm.
like I don't feel upset. I don't feel happy. I just feel neutral. It's something that happened. I've worked through it and I've come to the other side. And I feel that whole process has made me a stronger person. Not that
Absolutely.
I'm commending it as anyone's
You can't
past.
change the past. I say that all the time. Looking in the past and ruminating on the past, if feeling guilt or shame over our past would change it, my past would look completely different. It's just a waste of energy. If we could change our past, we would, but we can't. So we have to play the cards we've been dealt, which is what Iris is talking about. I want to thank everyone for joining us today and thank you for being here, Iris. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Christy.
Be on the lookout. We will put out another one on some very specific things people can do to process the trauma that happened to them and in their childhood if you are an adult. Thank you everyone for being here. I hope you have a great day.